Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by our newest co-host.
Patrick, hi, how are you?
Patrick is in the hot seat while Andrew is still on holidays enjoying the European sun.
Baking away.
That's it.
And, we're freezing our little tushies off over here in Melbourne.
We are, absolutely, absolutely. And Andrew's going to come back and he's going to be tanned. You know that, right? Yeah. So anyway, Pat, what have we got in store for our viewers and our listeners today?
Yeah, so a couple of things to talk through, but what we like to kind of see is the foundations of financial success, really. So, a couple of points to, some pretty basic points, to be honest, but a lot of what we see is missed a lot of times as well. So some people get it right from the beginning. Others, it takes a bit of time to kind of get that foundation right as well. So once you build this up, the rest is, up to you in terms of where you want to go and the financial success you want to see as well.
Yeah, and I might just preface this, that this stuff is not taught in schools. And it's always baffled me, but it's something that we think is so critical because of what we do for a living. I actually think it should be a core subject in our education system, but understanding financial literacy, understanding money management, understanding basic finance principles, I think is a key life skill to have. So some of the things that we're going to talk about, just really short, sharp, fire way of thinking about the financial foundations that we see when we're having conversations with people around what should they be thinking about, and almost an order of sequence here around our thinking when we're talking to people about getting the foundational part of their finances correct in order to set them up for success heading into the future.
Absolutely. I think one of the areas that, you don't have to get this right from the get-go. Sometimes It takes a bit of time to unlearn some of the bad habits and then relearn some good habits as well. So oftentimes we kind of talk to clients about, hey, this is the ideal kind of foundation, the ideal structure. And then, we'll help them build elements of that over time. And like I said, it could take a couple of years, could take a couple of goes at it before they get it right. And, once again, habits take a bit of time to learn as much as anything. So
Pat, let's kick it off. The first one seems really obvious and it's almost too obvious to say, but getting this right, I think, is almost the foundational piece associated with wealth creation, but it's spending less than you earn.
It's an area that we see all too often. Fortunately, it's an area that, even for myself, I got into a habit of spending too much and kind of then having to backtrack a little bit to some extent. But it's, definitely spending less than you earn. And I guess knowing your numbers is probably the flip side to that equation as well. So it's kind of like understanding, what money actually comes through on a regular basis, and how much can you then use that money then to do what with? Because it's like, hey, if you've got $100 a week to spend and you're spending 120, you're going to be, up, what's pretty short period of time.
So from that note, I guess there's really three main points that I can think of with this is you increase your income as much as you can. I mean, that's a pretty obvious one. You decrease or minimize your expenses. But probably the third one, we've been talking about it on the podcast a bit, but the benefit and the necessity of having a cash flow management system. So if you get your system right, you don't actually have to worry as much around minimizing your expenses because the system will do it for you.
Yep.
So that's probably the third pillar in terms of getting the spending less than you earn. If you can get that right and you can form good habits, the rest of it almost becomes easy because you've got the financial capacity there to be able to divert resources to those things.
And you basically give yourself a bit of breathing room as well when it comes to these things. Because don't forget, life's unpredictable at the best of times.
Yep.
So there's always going to be an instance where, there's a bit of an emergency. So you need to dip into savings of some sort. And having, and I'm jumping down the list a little bit in terms of the foundation stuff, but having a surplus and surplus income or discretionary income to be able to build an emergency account as well, so that when stuff hits the fan, at least you've got something to rely upon as well. So definitely know your numbers, definitely kind of understand what that looks like, and then obviously build from there.
Yeah, and that's the second part of it is having an emergency fund in case something goes untoward. You don't have to borrow money off someone. You don't need to go into debt in order to do it. You don't need to hit up a payday lender in order to get through. And that amount there, and we've done a very good job in the finance world about being vague around this number, but I'm going to try and unpack it a little bit. We talk about 3 to 6 months of living expenses, and the reason why, in my opinion, there's a discrepancy is because 3 months for you may not suit me, so I need more security from a comfort level perspective. But above and beyond that, I might have less job security than you do. So I might need more in my emergency fund than you do. So in my opinion, it's never just a straightforward mathematical calculation. It's kind of a bit of the art and a bit of the science sort of blending together to see what works for that person.
Yeah, and it depends on the person as well. Some people might be much conservative, and they might want to err on the side of like 6 to 9 months potentially. But once again, the number itself doesn't necessarily is the end goal. It's the what does it provide you, and I guess the psychological element to it all as well is, once you've hit that number, so let's say it's $10,000 a month, just to keep my math simple here. Once you've got 3 months or 6 months worth of that, so $30,000 or $60,000 of that put aside, squirrel it away wherever that is, it then actually provides you with a bit of comfort that you know that if something happens, you've got an emergency account ready to go and you can ride through another pandemic.
Whatever it is.
We saw that a lot happening over that time frame just because a lot of clients who had that ready to go weren't set up for it at the beginning. And then others who were then had the capacity to obviously do something with it thereafter. So it's making sure you've got an account there. It provides you with a literal account and then obviously a psychological element to it as well.
Pat, what are our thoughts around at this point in time as well too?
Debt is obviously an element where, there's people talk about good and bad debt. When you're talking about the foundations of it, the minimum foundations of it, I think avoid debt as best as possible. I think that's probably just the number one kind of general rule of thumb. Credit cards are probably the element that a lot of people get, burdened with, particularly when they're starting out, when they're just starting working and things like that. Your bank probably is the first thing to hit you up with, hey, here's a $20,000 credit card or a noose around your neck and go for your life.
Pre-approved limit, right?
Yeah. So that I find in itself is, one of those the slippery slopes that it happens to unfold a lot of good habits you can get into. So if you've got a credit card, having that place tends to be a bit of a, sort of getting into the bad habits.
Out of the back of that, there's the budget piece. So whether or not that comes at this stage or a little bit further up in terms of our list, definitely having a budget. And we always talk about a realistic budget versus an aspirational budget. So I guess with any financial plan, with any financial strategy, if you don't know where you stand and it's not clear, it's going to be really difficult to figure out a pathway forward. So having a budget, and then what we encourage and what we do in terms of our advice and the strategies that we deploy is off the back of that budget, we create a cash flow banking system. So your money management becomes very, very easy to manage, and we structure it in a certain way where it actually prevents overspending. So if you can get that piece right, the budget is absolutely critical that sits sort of and underpins this as well too. And that ties into what I was saying at the start around spending less than you earn.
Just to clarify, when we say budget, we don't mean, hey, get to the end of the month, record what you spend, and then go, this is what I spent. It's more of a case of, hey, this is what I should be spending, and then tracking your expenses through that, and then adjusting, your numbers, so to speak, to make it, between aspirational and actually realistic, right? Oftentimes when I see, you ask someone, do you have a budget in place? And I track all my numbers. I'm like, great, what is it? And they're like, oh, it's different every month. I'm like, that's not a budget. You're basically just tracking your expenses, right? And me personally, I'm quite deliberate in terms of how I track my budget. So I'm very precise. And that's just me, just personality-wise. I'm very kind of precise in terms of how I spend. And so what I try to do is actually kind of run it like I run a business, right? You kind of go, hey, this is what I'm going to spend this month, next month, the month after. There's always going to be some discrepancies along the way, and that's fine. But I am able to track exactly how much I am able to spend. I'm able to set aside / savings, how much I'm able to invest as well. So you're very deliberate with every aspect of that. And the money, there's no amount of money that's not doing something. And that's kind of where you want to get to. Takes a bit of time to get to that point. Even for myself, it's always a work in progress. But
it just goes to show how difficult this particular aspect is. And the truth is, it's very easy to spend money these days, not only in terms of just the cost of living has increased and everything's more expensive, but the accessibility of, you tap and go. It's not like you carry cash around anymore. And once the cash is empty out of your pockets, you're done. You can't spend anymore.
Yeah.
It's very accessible. You've just got it with you all the time if you've got your telephone, right? So, Pat, next step, insurances, protection plan. What's our thinking around that?
Yeah.
How does that then play into this?
This is kind of quite critical, and it depends on what stage of life you're at with family, that kind of thing as well, debts and other aspects. But certainly an area that we're big proponents of, making sure that you've got something else. You built a plan A. You want to make sure you've got a plan B in place as much as anything. And this is more than evident particularly where there's there's husband, wife, kids, and there's one main breadwinner in the family. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Whoever that may be, there's always an element where if you don't have the right protection in place, then you're setting yourself up to fail to some extent. And going back to what we were talking about before with the emergency fund, income protection and that kind of thing as well, you kind of chop and change that as time goes on. You build up some leave to be able to rely upon, push out your waiting periods on your income protection plan, things like that. It all kind of ties in together so that you might not actually be there right from the beginning, but you're building upon those steps along the way as well.
Yeah, and that's definitely the case. Plan A, fantastic, all the lights and the shiny stuff, and it sounds great, but if something goes wrong, how do we protect that position so there's no financial detriment to the household? At that point in time, having a roof over your head, and we don't mean renting, a lot of the conversation tends to shift towards, hey, how can I get into my own property? Mm-hmm. So what does that look like in terms of, needing to have a deposit in order to get in? What does it look like in terms of the numbers around serviceability? But that tends to then form part of the conversation for a lot of people. That's, usually an exercise that if we have more time to plan, the better the result, especially considering how difficult it is to get a budget that factors in a reasonable time frame, the amount of money that you need to save in order to get a deposit. Deposit plus stamp duty, quite an expensive exercise. So the more time that we've got to plan and prepare for that, the better we are. But roof over the head definitely comes into the equation at that point in time.
And, if you look at it kind of on a high level perspective, having assets in the form of a home or an investment property, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to live in the place.
Yeah. Yep.
The tax system, and certainly, if you look further afield, like in terms of central link and things like that, the asset in terms of the home or the investment property certainly skewed towards that aspect. And so if you don't have one, you're probably in a worse off position later in life. So you kind of want to set yourself up for the foundation, right? The basics.
Yep.
And having an asset that's constantly working for you, and obviously there's borrowed money towards it. Once again, if you're leaning on the bank of mum and dad, which is a pretty nice bank if you have that access. But if you have obviously something to rely upon, and that's obviously borrowed money, that's obviously harder for you than a dollar for dollar's sake. Obviously that's going to work out much better.
Speaking of long term, superannuation. So thinking about longer term financial security and retirement income. So that then starts to come into play. The majority of people who are working, employed, your employer has to pay you superannuation, which is going up, by the way, on the 1st of July. So an extra 0.5% for everybody, which is good because that will add to the retirement income for all of us when we're older. But that's obviously coming into the thinking as well too. As you tend to get a bit older, I think it becomes more of a focus for a lot of people, starting to think about it. The first thinking about my own situation, about how quick kind of the first formative years of my career have gone versus how quick that was, and then thinking about what it's going to look like moving forward. You start to think about that stuff and you think, okay, am I on track to achieve the amount of retirement income that I'm hoping for?
It's one of those elements where, and I always talk about this with clients all the time, it's like two biggest assets, ability to generate an income in your time frame to generate that income, right? So like if you did this in your 20s versus your 30s versus your 40s, there's a lot more heavier lifting that your super, in this case, has to do to get you to the same joint, the same outcome, versus if you had done this 10, 20 years ago, whatever it is, there's more time for your super to do its thing, compound out, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an element of obviously letting the money work as hard as it can for you as early as possible versus doing it too late in life and kind of limiting your options as well.
Managing and paying off debt. So obviously we were talking about the property as an example, needing to manage that effectively. And I guess the simplest calculation for that is a standard mortgage in Australia is 30 years. So making sure that depending on when you take that out, when your 30 years starts, just sort of fast forwarding and going, okay, if I add 30 years to when I take out the mortgage? How old am I going to be? Am I still working? What's my income? What's my life stage? And thinking about that and going, okay, do we need to do accelerated debt repayments or something like that in order to be able to discharge it before I stop working? I mean, that's from our perspective as advisors, that's kind of what we aim for because usually that yields the most optimal result. But yeah, paying off and managing your debt is definitely a big one.
Yeah, obviously in the last year or so, that debt burden has certainly increased quite a bit. And so, being more deliberate in terms of how that is paid or when that's paid and how that fits into the broader scheme of your plans as well is definitely an important consideration because, if someone waved their magic wand and said, hey, your debt's cleared, that's effectively for most people about 30-40%, potentially even more of their after-tax income, mind you. So there's tax that's taken into account for that.
Yep.
After-tax income that they would be completely clear of, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're rid of that, then certainly there's going to be more discretionary income, more options for you to plan out and do the next iteration of whatever your plan is.
And then probably the last bit, Pat, once you've a lot of those off the list and you're happy with the plan that you've got and the foundations that you've got set, is looking at some of your lifestyle goals. Yeah. Travel. We just came back from America, right? So I've still got that in my mind and got the travel bug too. So, but no, lifestyle goals is something that tends to pop up a fair bit as well too.
And obviously, once again, lifestyle goals are for you versus for me versus someone else. It's going to be different, right? What that means, how much that costs, what are you trying to plan for effectively as well? A lot of the conversation we eventually get to with a lot of clients is then getting them to a point where they're setting their kids up for success as well. Yep. So once again, the foundations of financial success. Plus also it's like making sure that they get a little bit of a helping hand, a little bit of a leg up, so to speak, later in life so that they're not having to worry so much as much as anything. So, that intergenerational planning element of it is certainly an important consideration. But something that, we love talking to clients about. Like it's one of those things. It's like, you've done all this great work for your parents. We want to make sure that your kids are set up and everything as well. So,
Pat, well said, well summarised. I think we did that one justice on the financial foundations that we talk to people about. Nice, short, sharp sort of insight into our thinking around those different areas. So thank you for your time on the podcast today.
It's all good. And like I said, any one of these elements is probably a podcast in itself, and obviously something that we spend a lot of time just talking to clients about all the time. So, obviously if anyone wants to chat further and wants to kind of delve into any one of these elements, obviously we've got our details on the line.
On the line in the show notes. And to our viewers and our listeners, make sure you hit that like and subscribe so we can show off to Andrew in his absence. But thank you for your time and attention, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorized representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.